Hey, what's up, everyone? I'm Tyler, and this is our sex talk. But it may not be what you're thinking, okay? This isn't the sex talk. Maybe you have a trusted adult or just someone who you'd consider older and wiser that you've had that talk with. And either way, what we're talking about in this series is something a little different and hopefully helpful for all of us. And the ways that people sometimes talk about sex these days tends to leave out aspects that are really important. And this series is all about asking the question, what if there's more to it than we think? And as soon as you heard what this is about, you probably started wondering, how in the world is this going to go? And if you're thinking this is the most awkward situation any human could possibly be in, talking about sex in a church setting, let me explain what my experience hearing about sex in church was like. All right, my dad was a pastor, and my sex talk that I had with my parents was a little awkward and a little lacking, I think. They had me watch a movie about the temptations that come when you become a teenager, and we talked about it a little bit, but we didn't really get into any specifics, at least that I can remember. And in health class, I remember it being awkward, and all the middle school boys in my class just giggled the whole time as we talked about things. And I also learned about it from a single female health teacher who did not seem too confident in her understanding of the male part of the health class. And I remember hearing a lot about it at church too, but back then it was all about telling the teenage kids in the youth group, sex is bad, don't do it. As in, you should have no sex, no thoughts about sex, and if you do, you're playing with fire conversation. So what I learned about sex at church was that it came with a ton of rules and expectations. The talks I got from church made it seem like if it happened, if I feel, think, or act in a sexual way before I was married, that I should feel some kind of guilt or shame. And I just remember being taught things about sex, but looking back, I just felt that they were lacking in information that would actually help me when I got older. And I also felt like I couldn't ask the questions to someone when I actually had questions about sex because it was just a bad thing and I wasn't supposed to even be thinking about it, let alone ask questions about it to a trusted adult or anyone like that. And some of you can probably relate. For others, your experience may be totally different. The hope is that no matter what your experience is, it won't be, the experience that I had won't be your experience because of the way that we'll be talking about sex these next 4 weeks. And regardless of what your experience has been with the talk, whether you got it from a parent or your health teacher or at church, your friends, on the internet, or not at all, something we can probably all relate to is this. When it comes to sex, everyone has an opinion. Everyone has something to say. Everyone has a reason for why their view is the best. And this makes things really difficult. It isn't that no one is talking about sex. It's that everyone is talking about sex and hardly anyone is saying the same thing, which leaves us with a problem. What should we believe? Where do we go to find out what we really need to know? When everyone acts like an authority on the subject, how do we know who is actually in authority and who just has an opinion like everyone else? The thing is, with as many messages as you have already gotten about sex, what if there was still something more to it than you think? What if even with everything that you've already heard, there's something that you hadn't heard yet? What if there was more to it and that more actually simplified all of the messages? That's what we are going to spend our time talking about today. So have you ever tried to jump into the middle of a show, a few seasons in, or opened up your group chat, read the last message, and you were totally confused because you missed at least 70 messages that were in there? You'd probably say to yourself, I'm sure that this makes sense, but what did I miss? You'd have to figure out how it all started. And in the same way, when it comes to sex, going back to the start is actually very helpful for us. If we want to get a better idea of what to do with all the messages and the information that we are being told about sex, going back to the very beginning is a good first step. And when I say beginning, I mean the very beginning, not the very beginning of your life, but the very beginning of Earth, of everything. And it all comes in the book of the Bible called Genesis. And the thing that you need to know about Genesis is that it was written as a book of beginnings. This ancient book includes the story of the beginning of the world from the perspective of the people of Israel. Genesis opened with the creation of the world. It's the story of God's intentional work to make the world. Also, as each day passes in the story, the creation gets more and more complex. Then on the sixth day, God makes human beings. And this is what the author of Genesis writes. And this is in Genesis 1:26 through 28. It says, "Then God said, 'Let us make human beings in our image, to be like us. They will reign over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, the livestock, all the wild animals on the earth, and the small animals that scurry along the ground.'" So God created human beings in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. Then God blessed them and said, "Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and govern it." So these couple of verses tell us a few things, but for our purposes, that we'll focus on two of them, all right? Number one, God made people and God made sex. That's our starting place. God created sex for people, and God made sex as a good thing. So how do we know? Because after every day of creation, the writer tells us that what God made was good. But after making humanity and God telling humanity to fill the earth, and after they were blessed with the power to create life, like God had just created life, the writer doesn't say that it was good. The writer actually says that it was very good. So when we go back to the beginning, we know this, that sex is good and sex is powerful. That's what this is all about. Good and powerful. And that's the first message that we have about sex. We might hear a lot of different things coming from a lot of different people in a lot of different places, but this is what God has said about sex from the very beginning. Sex is good. It can feel good. It is an expression of love and trust and vulnerability. And sex is powerful. It brings two people together in an intimate way, and it can create life. It can bond relationships, and it also can break relationships. And if sex is good and it's powerful, that means sex isn't shameful. It also means treating it casually means that we might be missing out on so much more than it actually has to offer. So how we treat sex and how we treat people matters. But what does that mean for us now? With all the other things that seem to be said about sex, what are we supposed to do with the fact that God made sex good and God made sex powerful? Well, we need to live with a very important word that we want to talk about this whole series: sexual integrity. Now, that might be a phrase that you haven't heard before, or maybe you've heard, but you aren't exactly sure what it means. So let's define that before we go any further in this. First of all, integrity is simply living in a way where your beliefs and values match your actions, where what you think and hold deeply to be true comes out in the way that you live. So when we say that we need to be living with sexual integrity, it means that what we think about and believe about sex matches how we treat, talk about, and view sex. So we define it in this way. Sexual integrity is guarding your potential for intimacy through appropriate boundaries and mutual respect. So when your beliefs about something match your actions, you are set up to win in that area of life. And with sex, that means that you are better set up for a relationship that are more than just a physical experience. There is more of a chance to experience sex how it was actually designed to be experienced, as a connection that is physical, yes, but also emotional, mental, spiritual, that involves your whole self and not just your physical self. Sex this way allows you to feel safe and known with another person. And that's the goal for sexual integrity. And we get there with, number one, appropriate boundaries, and number two, mutual respect. We'll be talking about this whole series. So let's sum up those phrases, okay? Appropriate boundaries and mutual respect. All right, so when we say creating appropriate boundaries, we mean having a conversation with yourself and the person that you are with about what is acceptable physically and emotionally. It also means having conversations about what you are going to do to keep those boundaries. It means talking to a trusted adult about their perspective, someone who can help you see past your thoughts and feelings with a more long-term goal in mind. for your future and the other person's future. It means being smart and thoughtful before you get in a situation where being smart and thoughtful is a lot more difficult to do. It means being proactive ahead of time about what you want and don't want when it comes to that moment. And here's what we mean by mutual respect. Mutual just means that you are making decisions realizing there is more than one person involved here. Mutual means shared. So to have mutual respect means that there is a shared respect, a shared honoring of one another. That means that you aren't in this for yourself and you won't be with someone who is only in it for themselves. It means there is a question of what is good for both of us. Does this honor them? Does this honor myself? This means that you don't take advantage of someone else and you don't compromise your own boundaries. This also means that you have conversations instead of trying to read someone else's mind. And you don't expect someone to read yours. You treat that person and you treat yourself as someone who God made, who He loves unconditionally and highly values. Because we are those things. And in other words, sexual integrity is about way more than just sex. It's about how you understand sex as good and powerful, but also how you view yourself and others. Do you respect them? Do you honor them? Do you value them? Do you see them as a whole person with thoughts and feelings and hopes and fears just like you? And if you do, here's the integrity part. Are you treating them like all of that is true? God made humans very good. And part of God's plan for these very good people was sex as a very good and powerful thing. And if we want to be clear about what God has planned for sex, we can be sure about this. Sex is good and sex is powerful. And because of that, we need to be careful and intentional about how we treat sex. But even more than that, how we treat people. So imagine if all of the messages that we heard about sex, all of the talks that we've ever been given, all centered around this idea. What if there was more to sex and it was much simpler than just we imagined? That sex is good and sex is powerful. And because of that, how we treat sex and how we treat people matters. Even more, how we understand sex and how we see and think about people matters. Imagine how much better that we would see one another, how different our standards would be. So when we see God's design for sex more clearly, we can see just how good and powerful it really is. So living with sexual integrity means living in a way that believes sex is good and powerful, and people are good and powerful and deserve to be treated that way. So let me pray for you as we are entering into this next series. So Father, I just pray that as we talk about sex, as we talk about boundaries, as we talk about mutual respect over these next couple weeks, I just pray that you can really help us see our hearts and know what is good, know what is right when it comes to sex, when it comes to boundaries, mutual respect, all of those things. And especially sexual integrity, God, may we live with that. May we actually live out what we believe. And so, God, we know that there's a temptation to just go after our desires, after our cravings, but God, I pray that we can know what is right to be honoring to you. We love you, Jesus, and we thank you for everything. We pray this in your name. Amen. All right, guys, we'll be continuing this series next week on This Is Our Sex Talk, because everything that we're talking about is good and powerful.